Welcome, researchers and cosmology graduate students. Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're detailing the absolute medium model. It's a deterministic, fluid-elastic framework that entirely replaces those, let's be honest, ad hoc singularities standard models heavily rely on. We're going to explore how completely discarding the idea of an independent background vacuum actually allows us to map the universe as a totally continuous, singularity-free ecosystem. Looking at our agenda for today, we're going to start by refuting the initial singularity, then move into structural monism and the DP field. From there, we'll cover the cosmic fall and vorticity, how we actually derive relativity and flow, the concept of the inverse egg, and finally, we'll wrap up with the immortal engine. All right, part one, refuting the initial singularity. To really begin, we have to expose the inherent mathematical flaws of standard cosmology. Specifically, this impossible reliance on a zero-dimensional starting point. When we lay out the comparison, it brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between standard models, which have to invent ad hoc mechanisms like cosmic inflation, and our purely deterministic physical alternative. In the absolute medium framework, we don't kick things off with a mathematical impossibility. Instead of an infinitely dense origin point, we start with universal topological saturation. Instead of particle creation happening ex nihilo, just popping into existence out of nowhere, our particles are isolated primordial fossils. And instead of some hypothetical scalar field driving cosmic inflation, we have a catastrophic universal decompression. But why exactly must we discard the singularity? Well, standard singularities directly violate the overarching axioms governing field persistence and physical admissibility. Let's really zero in on two critical ones from that 8-axiom framework. Axiom 2, the hard irreversible boundary, mathematically guarantees that continuation through infinite strain is physically prohibited. Basically, any dynamical trajectory that hits maximum structural strain just terminates. It's done. So when continuous evolution becomes impossible, Axiom 7 kicks in. This forces a discrete topological phase transition to avert mathematical divergence. The universe doesn't just break into infinity, right? It transitions. Which brings us to Section 2, Structural Monism and the DP field. Here's where things get really fascinating. We are formally discarding the idea that space is just some empty container. Under structural monism, the aggregate of all particles and their interparticle dynamic tension literally is the medium. Within this paradigm, baryonic matter isn't just sitting around inside a void. Rather, it's acting as isolated geometric knots within a quasi-incompressible tension net. And this unified system is what we define as the dissociative pressure field, or the DP field. To really conceptualize this monistic architecture, think of a shattered pane of tempered glass. It is a perfect analogy. When tempered glass shatters, you don't end up with glass fragments floating in some separate, invisible background glass. The structural remnants form two inextricably linked states. The intact, unfallen, dense nodes represent baryonic matter, the particles. Meanwhile, the thermodynamic, elastic tension lines stretching between them represent energy and the active skins. Together, they form a single, unified, completely self-contained web. Moving right along to Section 3, let's talk about the cosmic fall and vorticity. 10 to the 59th power joules per cubic meter. Prior to the cosmic fall, the entire pre-universe was homogeneously stretched to this exact causal saturation limit. It wasn't a point. It was a vast continuum acting as a single, hyper-stiff monolith of raw fluid-elastic potential. But as we know from Axiom 7, this state of maximum thermodynamic duress absolutely could not last. A localized fracture triggered a universe-wide phase transition. The entire medium relaxed almost instantaneously, perfectly negating the horizon problem and doing it without needing cosmic inflation. The cores that failed to relax, they locked in this extreme density. These are the fundamental particles, our primordial fossils trapped right there within the relaxed ambient medium. Now, during that universal decompression, it created an infinite pressure differential between these superdense, frozen cores and the newly relaxed ambient medium. These extreme radial pressure gradients induced severe advective shear along the core boundaries. Because the core naturally resists dissolution, it mathematically forces the linear strain to curl into angular momentum. Mathematically, the vorticity, omega, is directly proportional to the localized pressure gradient over density, and is defined as the curl of the flow velocity. This violent rotation is not just some arbitrary quantum spin. It's a mandatory fluid dynamic consequence of decompression via shear instability. Okay, Section 4, deriving relativity and flow. As advanced researchers, you really have to explicitly distinguish between the causal hydrodynamic reality of the DP field and the matter-centric snapshots we typically use in standard effective field theories. The medium-centric view is the true generative engine of existence. On the flip side, the matter-centric view, which encompasses the standard model and standard astrophysics, is essentially just a snapshot observation perspective. It's a low-energy approximation that treats particles as discrete entities, just to make the universe mathematically compatible with our limited human observations. And this distinction beautifully explains why our effective field theories actually work in the infrared limit. By evaluating the medium wave equation, where the D'Alemberian operator equates temporal evolution to the speed of sound squared in the spatial Laplacian, we can actually prove that the invariant speed of light, time dilation, and length contraction naturally emerge directly from the dispersion relation of the dphi field. Because those 8 axioms strictly dictate field continuity, emergent Lorentz symmetry and general relativity are strictly kinematic consequences of the medium's internal flow, not just arbitrary postulates handed down from nowhere. Now, let's look at the principles governing the cosmic memory of the dp field. Because the unfallen particles anchor the tension net, they collectively try to pull the entire web back into its unbroken primordial state. This elastic desire to recompress manifests as macroscopic advective currents, which are governed by the volumetric coupling principle. This routes the relaxed medium right around the localized kinetic storms of particles. So, the gathering of floating matter into these restorative fluid currents, that is exactly what we classically perceive as gravity. Let's transition to section 5, the inverse egg. So how does the universe enforce global geometric flatness without invoking dark energy? Standard models face a severe fine-tuning problem here, the famous flatness problem. To make their math work, they literally have to invent dark matter and dark energy to balance the cosmological equation. But under structural monism, flatness is a mandatory, self-regulating, fluid dynamic equilibrium. Without an independent spatial container capable of arbitrary curvature, the macroscopic geometry is dictated entirely by the tension lines stretching between those unfallen nodes. Think about it this way. As the expanding bubble of our universe pushes outward, it doesn't expand into some empty void. It plows directly into the unbroken, maximally stiff primordial omniverse block. Governed by the non-linear elasticity principle, the medium's thermodynamic resistance diverges non-linearly. The boundary mathematically shock stiffens into a hyper-rigid macroscopic boundary layer, what we call the inverse eggshell. This absolute physical boundary dynamically confines the internal tension net. It protects the internal universe from external forces and ensures that the web of macroscopic gravity remains universally taut. It's perfectly flat because it is quite literally pulled tight across all vectors. Finally, section 6, the immortal engine. It turns out particle genesis wasn't just a one-time historical event. Whenever localized strain breaches the admissibility limit due to extreme kinetic wave interference, the medium mathematically must buckle and form new matter. But, crucially, it obeys strict universal energy conservation. Continuous particle genesis requires a zero-sum thermodynamic energy exchange integral within a closed system. The rest mass energy of a newly generated particle draws energy directly from the d-field's localized strain to freeze those hyperdense cores. Ultimately, this framework reveals that the universe operates as an immortal thermodynamic recycling engine. It's constantly tying and untying itself at the absolute physical limits in 4 distinct evolutionary phases. Phase 1, genesis via extreme kinetic wave interference. Phase 2, aggregation of this mass through macroscopic advective flow. Phase 3, compression into macroscopic isolation bubbles, what standard physics calls black holes. And Phase 4, rupture and rebirth. When these bubbles hit structural instability, they violently rupture, explosively liberating all that trapped kinetic energy right back into the dp field to trigger phase 1 all over again. So if the universe really is an immortal, fluid-elastic ecosystem continuously recycling its own mass, how will eliminating the background vacuum fundamentally reshape your next theoretical physics paper? If we no longer need the Big Bang singularity, cosmic inflation, or the gloomy prospect of an impending heat death to balance our equations, the implications for your research are absolutely boundless. I'm going to leave you with that provocative thought to consider just how the absolute medium and structural monism will completely redefine the way we research the cosmos. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep pushing the boundaries of what we know.